Absolute value. So you think of absolute value as distance on the number line. So let's say we got a number line, right? And say we got, this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, and the negative, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the positive, right? So if you had a distance from here to here, right? It's -3 to 0, right? But how many marks is it to 0? It's 1, 2, 3. So it's 3 steps away from 0. So you could write it that the absolute value of -3, this is how we mark absolute value right there, is with these lines. The absolute value of -3 equals 3. Right? And if you were to say, what's the distance between 0 and 5, right? Over here at 5, you could say the absolute value of 5, well, it's 5 ticks away, so it's 5. So you might think that you could just, take the negative. That's not necessarily that easy. Here's the formal definition, right? We could say if A is a real number, that's how you write that, a real number, that's a symbol for it, then the absolute value of A is absolute value of A, and you write like this, equals A if A is greater than or equal to 0, and negative A if A is less than 0. I should write this as capital. I've got these all mixed up. These should be capital. Alright? You guys with me? Alright. So, here's an example of that in action. Let's see how I do it right here. We already saw -3. What if it's 3? Absolute value of 3 is what? 3. Absolute value of -3 is 3. If you take the negative of the absolute value of 3, that's tricky, right? You're going to take the absolute value of 3 first, which is 3, and then apply the negative, so that's going to be -3, right? It's on the outside. See, that's the difference. It's on the inside or the outside, right? So what about the negative of -3? What's that? Well, the absolute value of -3 is 3, and then you negative, so that's -3. Right? What's the absolute value of 0? It's 0. Let's see. There are some very specific properties that we need to look at. Right? If it's just a number that's greater than or equal to 0, then it's always going to look like this. equals 3 greater than or equals 0. And the way you can think about this is that the absolute value of a number is always positive or 0. So the absolute value of a number is always greater than or equal to 0. Positive or 0. Greater than equal to or 0. Alright? And 3 right here satisfies that. It's greater than or equal to 0. Well, what about this? If we say that a number equals its own negative absolute value. That's important. And the absolute value of a number is always equal to the negative absolute value of, or the absolute value of its own negative, right? So the absolute value of 5 equals the absolute value of negative 5. Alright, I want to read that again. A number and its negative have the same absolute value. Alright? There's another property of negatives here. Negative AB equals absolute value, or excuse me, absolute value of AB equals absolute value of A times absolute value of B. Right? So, if we were to say absolute value of negative 2 times 5, right? Then we would have to split those up. It equals absolute value of negative 2 times, I could put that here too, times the absolute value of 5. What's that going to evaluate to? Well, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, and the absolute value of 5 is 5, so that's 10. And if we have page here, if we have the absolute value of A over B, that equals the absolute value of A over B. Right? So what that means is you got to separate this out, though. Here's what it's trying to say. Oh, excuse me. This is wrong. What it's trying to say is, it's trying to say this. Right? The absolute value of A over the absolute value of B. You see the difference? Yeah, you see that? Yeah, you see the difference? It's important. Let's try this here. Absolute value of 12 over negative 3. Well, then we're going to take the absolute value of 12 over the absolute value of negative 3. Right? And the absolute value of 12 is 12. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Right? So that's 4. Alright. Let's stop.